Today's date is the 6th of May 2021. My name is Jack McEntee, and I'm interviewing Steve Brown of Brown's Hurdlemakers, the part of my project, Encounters of a Rural Kind, focusing on people's experience with rural crafts in and around the local area. So before we get started on your experience as a hurdle maker, Steve, as the expert on hurdle making with us, could you give us a brief description of what hurdle making is for those people that are listening and have absolutely no idea?
Yeah, hurdle making is this rural craft. It's been around for thousands of years. Probably one of the oldest professions. In simple terms, a hurdle is made from split hazel. It's a fence panel. Their use has evolved over the years. There's some been found on the Somerset levels that were laid flat on the ground, used as a walkway. They've been used as wattle daub to make walls for houses, and they've also been used more recently, or most of our work now is for garden fences as an alternative to that panel. A hurdle is a number of uprights, and then with split hazel woven in amongst the uprights. Typically they're 6 foot long, and then by height 3 up to 6 foot high. And the craft of hurdle making is basically the skills associated with making the hurdles.
Amazing. That is the perfect description, I think, to start.
Potted history.
So exactly that. So for moving on to kind of now your experiences of hurdle making, when did you start hurdle making? And same kind of question, how did you get into hurdle making?
It's been in the family for a number of generations. I think we worked out I'm the 7th generation. My father went full-time hurdle making back in about 1989, having done it for a number of years before that in his spare time. It was always an interest watching him. He loved the work. He was very passionate about the work. And that sort of passion and interest rubbed off. From as soon as I could walk, we'd go up to the woods with him and help out. And then in 1996, I got the opportunity to go and work full-time with him. I'd finished university, didn't really fancy office work, so left, packed in the commute, and bought a Land Rover and went and started working in the woods. I worked full-time for about 11 years making hurdles. Dad taught me all the skills. Hurdle making, I think someone once said, it takes a few minutes to learn the skills, but a lifetime to perfect. And I think that's very true. You can learn skills very, very quickly, but it does take a long time to perfect them. And that it was always a continual learning process. Even when I've been full-time for 10 years, my father had been full-time for God knows how many years at that point. We'd still, you tried this will work a little bit different. And it's very much a learning process all the way through. Every bit of wood's different. Every little bit of wood is a challenge. But yes, it's even now, I'm basically full-time office work, but I still like to get out to the woods at every opportunity, just to keep the skills going, and also to enjoy the wood. When we were working full-time, we always worked out in the woods. So where the hazel was coppiced, we'd actually set the flake up and make the hurdles. So very, very peaceful, long way from the roads, nice and peace. You've got all nature around you. Absolutely fantastic environment to work in. Lots of fresh air, lots of sunshine. We'll gloss over the wet and the wind and the cold, because that you forget about that. It's all
needed, but not when you're outside.
Exactly. But yeah, it's. I learned it through the family. Dad did trace the family tree back, and it goes right back to, I think it's the 1851 census, where there was 3 generations of hurdle makers living in the same house.
Wow.
And so 1851 was the first census where people's craft was, or people's job was recorded. So it's possible there are more generations back before that. So taking the 3 generations in 1851 and working that forward, like I said earlier, I was the sort of 7th or 8th generation. So it's something I want to keep going. My dad went full time at 52. I'm getting close to 52, but unfortunately with the mortgage, It might be a little bit later when I go back to full-time hurdle racing, but it's once it's in the blood, you can never shake it off.
Definitely. That does lead me on to what I was going to say as my next question. So if you've had your dad there, fortunately, learning from the best, a great figure for you to learn from. Do you think that it's becoming more difficult for younger people, such as myself, or even people that are slightly older? And like you said, it really is a break from the kind of the busy roads, the busy cities, gives you a break from them. People that want to change it and get into it. Do you think it's getting more difficult to get into as a skill and a craft? Or do you think that the opportunities are still there for people?
The difficulty is making a living. If you want to do the crafts full time, because of basically the general cost of living, covering mortgage or the usual standard of living that we all aspire to be able to produce at a speed and quality that you can sell everything and make a living, it takes a long time to build up to that. And that's the hardest part. And what made me leave hurdle making was competition from imports. Now, to maintain the standard of living, to pay the mortgage, once my son was on his way, my wife gave up work. It was that I couldn't earn enough. We couldn't put the price up enough because we were being undercut by imports. And so anyone who wants to come into any of the rural crafts, it's one, having the patience that my father had to teach me and to get me to a standard where I could make a living. So basically being able to invest that time, having someone who's prepared to commit that time to you through basically an apprenticeship to get you up to a standard where you can work to a commercially viable level, is a huge challenge. Obviously, if you haven't got the commitments of a mortgage, if you're sort of semi-retired or haven't got the time and financial constraints that someone in their 20s, 30s has got, then it will be that much easier. But the challenge is getting someone who can train you to a suitable level to be commercial. You can do a hurdle making course. Typically, I think they're 2 days, 3 days, some courses. And it's like I said earlier, it takes a few minutes to learn the theory and a lifetime to perfect. So you can do your course 2-3 days, but at the end of that course, you're not going to be a fully proficient hurdle maker who can make a speed to make a living. And so that is where the real sort of time and financial investment comes, is being able to make to that standard. It is very much trial and error, but you do need, like I had, someone looking over your shoulder said, actually try this a little bit different. Dad had the patience to do that. I've tried teaching my son. He's 16 now and he made a fantastic hurdle last summer. But it is very time consuming to be able to get someone to take on all the skills and to see it through your eyes as much as, to get the techniques right. So yeah, the real challenges are being able to get the training, being able to get the continued input training, and to be able to have the time and patience to be able to build up to a speed where you can make a viable living. Rural skills, it's all the same. There was discussion a number of years ago, things like wheelwrights. I'm trying to think of the skills. Like the hay rakes, the lawn rakes made of ash, making bisms, all these sort of rural skills which are gradually dying out because people can't do it commercially. And so the skills are slipping away. When my father's generation passes on, if he hadn't had the patience to teach me, a lot of his skills and expertise would have gone to the grave with him. Unfortunately, I had the time and inclination. He had the patience to be able to pass those skills on. But I look at my sons, they have got different interests. They're unlikely in 15, 20, 30 years' time even to want to commit the time and effort to be able to learn the skills. And that's always going to be the challenge, to keep skills alive is having people that can do it at a high enough standard to keep the bar high. If it's done only as a hobby, a lot of the key skills that go to making a fantastic hurdle fall by the wayside, and you can make a functional product, but it's not going to last. And then anyone who learns from that functional product, they're going to lose a little bit of skills along the way, and gradually the skills die out.
Almost, yeah, like watering down of the skills as
that's it.
As it becomes less almost needed to be the top level, because you're not selling it for a profit. If you're doing it for a hobby, you're kind of saying that people can miss out bits that say the tricky bit, for example, that is really hard and gives you that extra level. If it's just a hobby, then you kind of don't need to do that kind of problem.
Yeah. There was one of the key elements that always stood out was when you finish making a hurdle, you trim the ends off with a hook. Now, what we were seeing more and more of was people trimming off with secateurs. It's functional, but it takes a quarter of the time to do it with a hook. To go right the way down the side of each hurdle with a hook is a few seconds, whereas to do it with secateurs just takes much longer, and you don't get as tidy a finish, and it is very noticeable. All the twists on the end of a hurdle, they give it strength. If whoever's making the hurdle doesn't put enough twists on, the hurdle's not going to be strong enough. And so it's another substantial element of the hurdle, that it's got plenty of twists. And so again, if someone's not taught to do the twists properly, the hurdles aren't as good a product. And so it's all of the skills that go with it, which you perfect over a period of time. And it's only by perseverance that you can maintain all those skills and keep it at the very highest level. And that's the challenge for anyone new coming into the industry, is to be able to keep persevering and to be able to keep working to get all those skills on board and to work them to a high standard.
Of course. Sorry, I was just going back to some of the points you said about the way things have kind of changed, and you've had to have the patience to keep with people, almost persevere with them going through it, and new people joining and kind of new techniques. Would you feel there's been positive innovation in the craft as well? So new techniques that are coming in that have helped hurdle making, or kind of that some of the issues have really almost dented the craft?
I think hurdle making as such, the skills are exactly the same as they were 200 years ago, if not longer. Splitting the wood, twisting the wood. What we've seen on some of the imported hurdles that have come in from Poland is where the hazel is lovely and straight. They haven't got the deer population that we've got that does damage to the hazel. They saw straight the way down through the hazel. So when we split it by hand, we're following the grain of the wood. Of course, when you cut it by saw, you're not following the grain, so it loses a lot of its strength. So, although it's an innovation which makes it quicker, makes it easier, you don't need the skill of splitting hazel. It actually weakens the end product. Using secateurs, it's an innovation which for some has made it easier, has made it more accessible. For the purists, less so, but then you could argue that to the purists, well, you use a car, that's a new innovation to get in and out of the wood, which 200 years ago you didn't have. As long as new innovations are used appropriately, so as long as you make the cut look like it's been done with a hurdle and keep it tidy, then yes, absolutely, it can make things easier and not detract from the product. It can enhance the product. I use secateurs for doing the tops. I won't use it for the bits down the side. Other than that, chainsaws obviously made it easier for cutting the wood in the first place. when I started in '96, we used to cut everything by hand, and then gradually sort of chainsaws crept in, half and half. After a couple of years, now everything's done by chainsaw. As long as it's done with consideration for the future growth, then yes, it's a good innovation which has made hurdle making more efficient, easier. Certainly easier on my knuckles, because when you're sort of cutting the big stuff, it can be quite hard on the wrists and knuckles.
Yeah, of course.
Other than that, I can't think there's any other innovations that we've really added. Obviously, use of Land Rovers and cars, like I mentioned, that's society as a whole's benefited from that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that the sort of angle you're looking at?
Exactly. I just kind of wondered, from someone that has, obviously I've kind of looked into it and seen what people have said about these new things. I just wondered, someone that's really experienced in it, their opinion of it. But also going back to another thing you kind of mentioned about the, say, foreign imports and just more processed hurdles coming in from various places. I think that beyond what you mentioned as well about not having the natural strength or components of hurdles, they also don't give the benefits for the surrounding wildlife that natural hurdle making does. Could you go over a few of those benefits for everyone?
Yeah, the woods we spent most of our time in near Puddletown. I think it was the Dorset Wildlife Trust came and had a look. Now, these woods have been coppiced continually since they were planted, which would be probably around about 300 years ago. So they've been coppiced on a regular basis. And so that cycle of dense canopy, obviously with the oak standards up above, and you've got the undergrowth with the hazel, that's cut back every 6 or 7 years. And so then you've got open, so you've got the sun coming straight on the ground. That cycle every 6, 7 years of going from no growth to canopy and then back to no growth as the wood is coppiced, it does create a very sort of diverse flora and fauna. Now, when like I said, I think it was the Dorset Wildlife Trust, I've got the paperwork here, they came and did a study on a certain area of the coppice that we work, and they found all sorts of, I want to say unusual, but a very diverse mix of flora and fauna in the coppice wood. And it was orchids, different types of flowers. I can't think of the full list, but it was a substantial list, and it was a real eye opener to see the benefit that was being done to the soil, to the biodiversity of the area by this regular cycle. Now, where we work, whilst we're working, we'll see birds of prey. Obviously got mice living around various parts of the wood. Often see deer, hares, got a word. What was it? Oh, foxes. Sorry, that was it, foxes. Yeah, so lots of wildlife. By actively managing the woods, we leave a lot of cover. We've stopped burning our waste, which hurdle makers always used to do. They always used to burn all their waste. We leave it to rot, and so that creates habitat for other wildlife. I was in the wood on Sunday, the weekend, and the string I'd laid of summer wood, which is the wood that we cut in the spring to last us through the summer months. Partway along the string was a thrush's nest. Now, where the wood is when it's cut and laid, it's very densely packed, and so it creates an ideal environment for thrushes to build a nest in. So when we come to want to use the wood, we have to check the string, make sure there's no nests there before we take all the wood, because obviously if we expose the nest, it's the mother will flee and the eggs go to waste. But what I can do is I can dig out that list, if you like, of all the flora and fauna, and send it across, and you can see the sort of scale of the impact that it has by the regular cyclocopsin. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I can't think of anything else that really sort of adds to the biodiversity by the process of coppicing. And we actively ensure that the way we cut the wood or cut the hazel when we're coppicing it allows the growth to come back. If it's not cut carefully, you can easily kill it off and then it won't grow back again.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So you just mentioned there, you specifically pointed out hazel. Are your hurdles only hazel, or do you kind of pick your wood on availability or preference, or how do you go about deciding what to use?
We'll generally only use hazel. That's the established wood that's used for the type of hurdles we make. Because we're up on chalk downland, there's no willow. So the hazel was planted initially as cover for pheasant shoots, and then the sheep farming came along because they had the hazel, and so they were turning the hazel into hurdles they could utilise them on a sheep farm. Other woods that grow, we do get sycamore growing in various places, which, although it grows nice and straight and is a perfect size at 7 years old to be able to use in hurdles, it's very brittle, so we don't use that. Ash we used for the flakes that we use. The flake is the mould that is attached to the ground that we use to make the hurdle in. So it's about 7-8 foot long, and it's got the holes in where the uprights for the hurdle will go.
Okay.
When we're making, so that's ash. If we do find willow, we use it for handles. It makes very good handles for the hooks. The only other one is elm. Some farmers, this is going back when hurdles were made for sheep farming, some farmers would specifically ask for hurdles to be made from elm. Now, when it's between about 7 and 12 years old, it is the ideal size for making hurdles, and it is very long lasting. Obviously, since Dutch elm disease in the 70s, a lot of the elm has died out. But one of the woods that we were working did have a lot of elm, and generally it would get to about 12 years old, and then the beetle would infect it, and it would die. So if we got there at just the right time, we could make a few elm hurdles. So lovely wood to work with, but just not enough of it to. Yeah, if it was there, we'd use it. But to be honest, for the last 15 years, probably everything I've made has been with hazel. So I haven't had any elm where I'm working. So, but yeah, hazel's a lovely wood to work with. Got a lovely smell to it and lovely texture.
And I'm sure it's helped you even master your craft even more so if you're stuck with that one type.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the willow hurdles are a slightly different style. They're made with much younger wood, and it's weaved in bunches. So it's a different skill to the hazel hurdle making. We find very few people will make both. So I'm not going to say some people don't, but it would be rare, I think, to work with both.
Picking a preference, definitely. So speaking of the making, I know, as you mentioned, the kind of 7 years to wait for the coppicing to then grow and then be available to use. And obviously, my next question is going to be very dependent on your level of hurdle making. Your kind of average hurdle, what would you say the time process to make one is? I know you mentioned about the industrial is obviously a lot quicker, but for you out in the woods on a Saturday or a Sunday, going through making your hurdles.
Cool. I'll just say historically, sorry, I just got quickly.
No problem.
When back in going back before my father's generation, the generation before, the full-time hurdle makers, they were expected to make 12 sheep hurdles a day. That was their target, to make 12 3-foot-high hurdles per day. The market's slightly evolved since then. Sheep hurdles were made. They're a slightly different style, but they were functional rather than aesthetic. They had to be safe, so you didn't do any damage to the sheep, but they were very, very functional. So the style of hurdle that we make for the garden hurdle, it's got to stand in someone's garden, look attractive for 7 to 10 years, and so there is an element of time to be spent to ensure it's a good looking product. Most of my work over the last few years has been 6 foot high hurdles. So 6 foot wide, 6 foot high. You've got to think about probably half an hour to cut the wood, probably half an hour to prepare it. So once it's cut, you lay it in strings, you turn the wood out. That's what we call it, turn it out. And so that's take it from the string, trim off all the brush, take the length that you want in your pile. So you probably want about half an hour for that. Then to do the actual making, you're probably looking at about 3 hours. So that will include preparing your uprights, preparing your rods in terms of splitting them, put them in the hurdle, and then trimming off at the end of it. So you're probably looking at about sort of 3 or 4 hours in total to make a 6 foot square hurdle. When I was working full time, I could do it a little bit quicker than that, but that was 15 years ago, and sort of muscles aren't as nimble as they used to be, so it's a little bit slower now. But yeah, realistically, if you said about 4 hours for a 6 foot hurdle, that's probably not too far out. Okay, and so you're looking at making 2, depending on how you profile your time, how you get your wood ready. You could potentially do 3 hurdles in a day.
Wow. And just for anyone listening, you won't be as quick as Steve, so don't be annoyed if it does take you a little bit longer.
It comes with practice. Yeah, I could never get 12 3-foots in a day, but at a push, when the wood was excellent, you could do 8, and that was going some. So, but it's, yeah, you felt it afterwards.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I made 3 6-foots in a day. No, I'd certainly suffer for the next couple of days.
I think I would with 1 by the sounds of it. So again, you mentioned that a lot of the work you do now is kind of for people's gardens and more decorative purposes. Would you say there's still quite a strong market for hurdles in that sense, even if for the more, say for like sheep, for example, now onto the more electric or wire fencing? For gardens, would you say it's still quite?
There's strong demand. When my father passed away, Alan passed away February last year, February 2020. He was still working 3 months before he passed away, and he was full time. Oh, excuse me, but he could never keep up with the demand for the amount of phone calls he was getting. There was not enough work for 2 of us, but more than sufficient for him. I work at the moment 1 day a fortnight because of my work pattern with my office work. I've now got work until January. Wow. And unfortunately, most of the phone calls I get when I say I've got work 6-8 months ahead, it sort of cuts the conversation off quite quickly. There's still strong demand, very much so. A lot of people have had hurdles before. They like the look and they want to replace like with like. The big peak that we saw around about the time I started in 1996 was when Alan Titchmarsh and Charlie Dimmock were using a lot of hurdles on various gardening programs, and that's when we saw the real sort of peak in demand. The biggest concern I see now with the future is hurdles that are not made to a high standard will not last as long. I've had traders contact me who've bought imported hurdles. If they don't sell them within 3 months, they have to burn them because they fall apart. Wow. So if you put that hurdle in your garden and it collapses within 2 years, you're going to think, I'm not having hurdles again because they're only going to last 2 years, and it tires everyone in the industry with the same brush. We've replaced hurdles that we've made in the past if they haven't lasted as long as we feel they should. So there is buoyant demand. There is a lot of demand. A lot of people unfortunately phone me when they don't get the response they want, which is a quicker delivery, turn to alternative products. So whether there's enough work for me to be full time, I'm not really sure. I don't think so. But there's certainly more work than I can manage at the moment. I could probably do 2-3 days a week comfortably, just based on the phone calls I'm getting now.
Wow.
But yeah, there's definitely demand. In terms of farming, there was, up until mid 1980s, we always Dad used to supply, well, actually mid 90s, sorry, Frome Agricultural Show with a number of hazel hurdles, sheep hurdles, to make pens up for judging of sheep during the show. And it was regular as clockwork. First couple of weeks in, say January, they'd phone up, say, right, we want 5 dozen hurdles for the show. Show date's this. Can you get them to us the week before? So it was regular as clockwork. So when this phone call didn't come, Dad phoned them up and just said, you know, do you want your hurdles this year? And they were very apologetic. And they said, unfortunately, we can't because of European regulations. So they had to use metal gates instead. In terms of commercial farming, they will use metal gates, electric fencing, or metal hurdles, sorry, electric fencing, rather than hurdles. We do occasionally get calls from smallholders for hurdles, but they're not the commercial side of agriculture. They've got a couple of sheep, they've got a couple of goats, they've got cow unlikely actually, and they're not doing it for commercial, they're not doing it for a living, and so they've got different budget to what farming has got, and so they are more inclined to pay the extra for aesthetic purposes rather than have the metal gates because they're more functional and will last longer. So probably in the last 5 or 10 years, less than 5% of our work has gone to agriculture in any sphere. The rest has been for garden fencing.
Oh wow! I think that's really interesting in the fact that it started almost strictly this way back, but strictly for agricultural purposes, and now it's become more of a personal preference or an aesthetic piece of almost at times almost even furniture.
Yeah, we saw that when I think it was sort of after the Second World War, 1950s, way before my time. Farming moved away from using hurdles and started using the like I say, electric fences, metal hurdles, more for an industrial product. There were a few hurdle makers. One in particular was the Davis family at Milburn St Andrew that we were heavily involved in later years. They persevered and kept the industry ticking over, and they were supplying a lot still to farming, but increasingly a garden market was evolving. It wasn't as large, the garden sector, as it is now by any stretch, but it was gradually sort of gaining momentum, and the real. See that. All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So through the 50s, 60s, 70s, they kept the industry ticking over. Did a lot of. They'd go to all the agricultural shows, garden festivals, things like that, showing the product. The vast majority of their work was for agriculture, and the garden market gradually just sort of ticked along. And then it was only in the probably 80s that it really started to pick up. And then early part of the 90s, like I said earlier, the gardening programs with Alan Titchmarsh and Charlie Dimmock, they gained popularity. And that's when the real sort of garden market really took off. But yeah, it's I suppose it's diversifying, isn't it? An industry that had the potential to die out. It's been maintained by targeting a different clientele. If the Davis family saw the prices I was getting now for hurdles, they'd be astonished, because obviously the farmers are always on a tighter budget, whereas people spending money on their gardens, it's a different philosophy. So, but yes, the market changed. Gardening was very small. Going back before, looking at sort of different uses of hurdles over the years. In the First World War, they were used to hold the sides up in trenches in the Somme. They shipped a load across to France and used them to hold the sides up in trenches. An unusual use. But yeah, certainly very, very few were used for gardening around about that time and up until the sort of 50s. And it's only sort of since then that market has really picked up.
Wow.
And like I say, that's 95% of our work now.
Yeah, I think if anything, that shows almost the diversity they can be used in and the practicality of them, that they can be used for so much and still, after so long, be almost attracting new audiences, even the people that think, oh, that would be nice after so long.
Yeah, there was a pub in Poole, Jolly Miller. They actually had them suspended in the ceiling, and so you had like strip lighting up above, and then the hurdles. They were made quite widely spaced, and so it diffused the light. So it wasn't sort of tightly packed, otherwise you wouldn't get any light through. But yeah, it was. They were suspended up above, just below the strip lighting, and it just sort of diffused the light, gave quite an unusual atmosphere.
Wow, does sound nice.
Yes, so wouldn't want to be stood underneath when it fell off, but
no, neither would I.
I wouldn't want to have to put them up there either. That would be hard work.
So you can make them, take them in, and hopefully they'll sort the rest.
Yeah, I just drop them off and run away. Yeah, no, the pub's been flattened now, so it's Falkland Square. It's where Falkland Square is in Poole. So I think it's the Jolly Miller.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Got me age now.
A few always quicker fire ones. Why should people get involved in hurdle making? If they should.
I think it's that's a tough one. I sometimes regret getting involved in hurdle making, but I think it's very rewarding when you can take a piece of wood, split it exactly how you want it. You can weave it in the hurdle exactly how you want it, and you can twist it, and then you can look at a finished product. It is a huge source of satisfaction. They do always generate a lot of interest. If someone wants to get involved and wants to persevere with it, I would say absolutely best of luck to them. Stick with it. It is tough, but if you want to be a doctor, you've got to train for 7 years. Hurdle making used to be a 4-year apprenticeship. It's not something you're going to pick up overnight, but when you do, and when everything clicks into place and you can make a fantastic product time after time, it's a source of immense satisfaction. It's very rewarding. When I go out to the woods, beautiful environment to work in, fresh air, wildlife, freedom. If anyone had the opportunity, I would say do it, because my father died a very happy man, having spent over many years living and working out in the woods. Absolutely loved it, and found great peace and contentment. And I think if anyone else could find that peace and contentment in that environment from doing something they love, I would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone.
Amazing. Final question then, as you are the expert, and we want to know a bit about your experience with the process. What's your favorite part of the hurdle making? So from the very beginning, picking what would you use, to looking at a finished product. Do you have a favorite part? What's your favorite part?
Getting paid.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the most satisfying parts was frosty mornings when you go to the woods, 7 o'clock, it's frost everywhere. You jump out of the cab, bitterly cold, and within 10 minutes your hands are warm and you can work, you feel comfortable, you feel warm, and it's just a beautiful environment. In terms of probably the most satisfying part of making, and this was always drew a lot of attention when we were making it agricultural shows or county shows or anything like that, is when you're trimming the hurdle off. So you've finished it, you've made it, you've put the finisher in, and then you've got to trim all the ends off the hurdle. And with a good sharp hook, you can literally just sort of work with one hit all the way up through the ends that are sticking out the side of the hurdle. If you've got a good eye, so you're always hitting exactly where you want to hit every time, and you can get one clean cut straight through, there's an immense satisfaction in that. And I think I always enjoyed that part of it. It's always a realization when you finish one hurdle, oh God, I've got to start another one now. But that process of the cutting right the way up through, always to create the finished product, and then once it's finished, you can look at it and say that's done. You'll always pick faults in it, but that process of the actual trimming off of the ends, I think, was always the favourite part. It's also one of the toughest parts to learn, because if you get it wrong, you can easily cut all your twists as you go. Or that's happened to my father when he was at Dorset County Show. As a cannon went off, his dog got nervous, ran straight up behind him, and as he cut, he followed through and caught the dog under the eye.
Oh.
So he didn't like that bit.
I'm sure.
But yeah, it was just pure misfortune. But yeah, I think that probably trimming off the ends is the favourite part. So much of it is just by instinct, because you learn the skills. When you're twisting, you can feel what the wood is doing in your hands. You're not really thinking about it. Your mind can wander off onto all sorts of other things, swearing at the radio, anything like that. So much of it is just instinct. But the part that you really have to focus on, and I suppose that's probably part of the appeal, is when you're trimming off the ends. So that's when the real sort of concentration needs to come in.
Amazing. Well, Steve, thank you so much. I think, if anything, we've learned from this that take your time if you want to start hurdle making. Be patient.
Yeah.
Be careful and enjoy it. Really, it sounds like a lot of fun.
It always has been. Yeah, one poignant moment when I'd made the decision I had to give up hurdle making and go back to office work. It was driving out through the woods. So this was the last day. This was new beginning. Didn't know when I was going to be back in the wood. Flicked the radio on, and Lucky Man by Verve came on. And I just think that was just so poignant at that time, because I was, 30-something. I'd spent 11 years doing an absolutely fantastic job outside. Loved the job, loved the environment. And I know that I'd done something that so many people aspire to, but have never had the opportunity. And I think that the poignancy of that song, that I've been very lucky to be able to do what I've done, really sort of struck a chord. Yes, if people have got the opportunity, I'd say to various people, you've got to chase your dreams, because they're not going to chase you. And I think if someone wants to get involved in hurdle making, just do it and persevere with it, and accept the fact that your first hurdle isn't going to be very good, your second one possibly the same, and you just got to keep persevering, and eventually it becomes second nature. It did for me. I had a great teacher who had all the patience in the world, but that's ultimately what it comes down to. You've got to have that patience, and you've got to have that perseverance. The same with any skill you want to learn. And if you're not prepared to commit the time, put that investment in, don't start, because it's a waste of time. But yeah, do it. If you've got the opportunity, do it.
Definitely. Well, Steve,
Heidi,
thank you so much. That was Steve Brown from Dorset Hurdlemaker, sorry, with an amazing interview about hurdle making. So thank you so much, Steve.
thank you. Thanks very much for your time, Jack.
Cheers.